Welcome once again to another episode of The Catholic View for Women, where we give you news and views from a truly Catholic perspective. I'm Teresa Tomeo, along with my co-hosts, of course, Astrid Bennett Gutierrez and Janet Morana. And we're continuing our discussion on our program, The Catholic View, regarding the issue of same-sex attraction. So we do want to let you know that we are advising viewer discretion with this episode, as we did with our previous episodes. And this one is very sensitive, but also very loving and very, very important. And we're entitling this episode, My Son Has a Same-Sex Attraction, What Do I Say? And this is what's very heartbreaking for parents, because they want to love their children, they don't want them to be alone, but at the same time, especially if they're believing Catholics and they're trying to be faithful to the church, there is that, they realize that they can't endorse this lifestyle that their children say that they think they should be able to live.
And to minister to the heart of the parent, because they're probably wondering and grappling with the question of why. Lord, what sense is it? What good can come out of this situation? So they're trying to understand in God's plan of salvation for that child, how it all makes sense.
Well, as we spoke about, there's a ministry, of course, as we said, courage, which we covered in our previous show. Well, part of courage has a part of that called Encourage, which is really geared for the parents. And of course, we went to the conference, like we spoke about, that the Archdiocese of Detroit put on, that had Courage. It was co-sponsored by Courage Ministry. And it was a tremendously good conference, because there was so many good resources there at that conference. And we got to actually speak to parents who were struggling, and now they're part of Encourage, and they go around speaking about what it felt like when their son came to them that he had the same-sex attraction.
Yeah, and the parent that you interviewed, actually two parents, a mother and a father, a married couple. We'll start with the mom, Susan Cavera. And again, as Janet said, we caught up with this wonderful, God-fearing couple who are doing their best to be faithful. They still love their son. The relationship is estranged right now. But we sat down with them, as Janet mentioned, at the Courage Conference, which was put on last year by the Archdiocese of Detroit and the Courage Ministry. And they told us their story of what it's like to have a son who has same-sex attraction.
When our son shared with us, I spoke with him alone, and he felt that he was homosexual, and I said, I don't believe that. I don't believe God made you that way. And I guess my greatest regret now is that instead of extending my love and confirmation of who he was as a person to him, I neglected to do that. I wish I had hugged him and told him that we'd be there with him through this struggle. And what happened as a result, eventually, after discussion, not negative, but after discussion, he left home and began to move around the country. And during that move, often there were traumatic events that happened, and then he'd move on to a new situation. But at that time, he was in contact with us because he needed help. And we had to assess, are we loving him or are we enabling him by helping him? And right now, we do not hear from him as much as we did in the beginning. In the beginning, we had chances to visit him in New York and Chicago and different places and have dinner and just enjoy one another, because the topic of this situation was not our focus. Our focus was to be with our son and to love him. And because of the new technology that I'm not really a part of, he doesn't call. He wants email instead, and therefore my husband is the one who emails, and so they have a connection that way, which I get to enjoy by looking at it. He's been away from our time together was just recently in September, but until then, we did not have any physical contact with him for 5 years, and it was wonderful to see him. We had a nice conversation, an opportunity to visit with his friend whom we enjoy and like very much. And that's sort of been it physically since last September. But we've had emails and that kind of thing. We did share with him The Desire of the Everlasting Hills, which he never commented on. So we don't know how he found that DVD to be. As I think back, and I felt myself that purposefully we don't do anything to hurt our children. And most of the people we have contact with are devout Catholic families. And so what has happened has not been our intention, but we certainly do find times that we regret that maybe occasions occurred that we didn't respond to correctly, or we may have hurt a son or a daughter in a way that we didn't understand, but because of their sensitive nature or the way they understood the situation, they were hurt from that. One of the reasons that we got involved with Courage is because as parents, we were in such pain, and at the time, we had no one to talk with. And so we needed to find support. We found, first of all, our support by reaching out to good friends who we thought would be very prayerful and support us in that way. Then we went to our pastor, who was wonderful, but he said he knew nothing about the situation, but he would accept what we were learning about. And so we could go back to him and talk, which we did, because I had stopped teaching, I stopped my job, and I was spending more time in prayer, more time in trying to find something that would be helpful, because I think the isolation is one of the biggest problems for the parents. You're hurting. I was crying a lot, not functioning very well. I read in a magazine about Father Harvey and Courage, and I called and talked with Father Harvey, and he was coming to the Detroit area at the Shrine of the Little Flower. So I took a day off from my work, and my husband took a day off from his job, and we went to visit Father Harvey. And when we visited with him, we thought, oh, he's going to, just think our story is so unusual. But he said he'd heard our story over and over again, and invited us to attend our first Courage conference. And we did, and we've never stopped going. We just went to our 19th Courage conference. And the main reason that we were motivated to keep going back, not only did we need more information, but we needed support. And we found the men and women who are striving to lead chaste lives to be just absolutely something we needed desperately. We needed someone to listen who understood, and they needed someone perhaps that understood them from a parent's point of view.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is so important that we minister to not only the people that are experiencing same-sex attraction, but also the parents. And I've been in touch with a man who leads Courage in Mexico. So he shared his story with me, and what was amazing is that he's seeing two extremes where people are either fine with it, they don't really care, or he's felt people attacking him, condemning him, even after he tried to be faithful and going to church. People would call him a hypocrite. People didn't know how to understand this. So it just feels like the church has this treasure to tell people, this is a cross people carry, that we need to be compassionate and we need to help them. And yes, the church is for them. The church is waiting for them, at like a hospital that's waiting for somebody that needs healing, that needs to be incorporated. Christ came for them. But unfortunately, in a lot of communities, they just don't know how to talk about it. And parents are really, really struggling. I was at the World Meeting of Families, and I was near the Courage booth, and I saw a Hispanic couple that didn't speak much English trying to have a conversation. So I went up to them, and they were telling me how their child just came out to them with talked about their same-sex attraction. So they were just wondering what to do, and I could see the pain in their faces, because they're faithful people, just want to know, what does God want of us, and how can we also deal with the situation, which was not just about their son. it was about ministering to them as well.
I wonder how many people even know that the Courage Ministry has Encourage for
Right.
parents. How many people even know about Courage?
Right, and
Because
then
it's not the
this
group
part.
that gets all the attention. I remember when the synod was happening in Rome, the Synod on the Family, another speaker at the Courage Conference, Paul Darrow, who's featured in the film The Desire of the Everlasting Hills, which has been shown on EWTN, in which we shared clips from it in previous Catholic View episodes. Maybe I think about 2 years ago, we actually went over that
Yes.
film. Paul Darrow actually spoke at another Courage conference similar to the one in the Archdiocese of Detroit that was held in Rome, and he was on my show my radio show talking about that experience. And at the end of his presentation, he became very teary-eyed. And remember all the controversy going into the synod about supposedly, this was going to happen and that was going to happen, and there was a lot of pressure from certain church leaders to really kind of, minimize this teaching and don't make a big deal out of it, or, whatever. But Paul stood up there and said, please, and he looked at the cardinals and the bishops, he said, please, 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 do not give in on this, because this is my haven. The teachings have saved my life. And these are the voices that people don't hear, nor do we hear the voices of the parents.
That's
Yes,
right.
his testimony is on the film
Desire of the Everlasting Hills,
which
right.
I highly recommend they see that.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
most
so important.
Well, with just like we talked about the goals of Courage, for Encourage for parents, they also have the goals of what they do for them. The first goal, number one, is to help members themselves to grow spiritually through developing a vital relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ as authentically taught in our Roman Catholic tradition. The second goal is to enable members to gain a deeper understanding of the needs, problems, and issues experienced by men and women with same-sex attraction. Number three, help members establish and maintain a healthy and wholesome relationship with the loved one who experiences same-sex attractions. The next is assist other parents and families not to reject, but to reach out with compassion and truth to the loved one with same-sex feelings and behaviors. And finally, the last goal, witness to our loved one by our own lives that a happy, wholesome life is to be found in union with Jesus Christ and his body, the church.
Oh, amen.
Because you heard what she said. She felt, what do we do and who do we turn
Yeah,
to?
they felt alone.
That's
But
right.
there is hope available. When we come back, we will hear from Susan's husband, Robert, his side of the story. You're watching, of course, a Catholic View for Women, and we're talking about a very sensitive topic. So again, we want to remind you that viewer discretion is advised. The topic or the title of this particular show is entitled, My Son Has a Same-Sex Attraction, What Do I Say? When we come back, we'll have another interview, but also great resources for you, or maybe you know someone in your family or in your area who has this situation. We will be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Catholic View for Women. Teresa Tomeo with you again. The topic of this show is My Son Has a Same-Sex Attraction, What Do I Say? We do want to remind you again that viewer discretion is advised. This is a sensitive topic, but it's something that we really need to talk about to help families, to help those with same-sex attraction, but also to help the families of those with same-sex attraction. How do you live with this attraction within the church? What does the church say about it? We're all called to be chaste. We're all called to be chaste. So the church has beautiful teachings on this and beautiful help available. Prior to the break, we saw the very powerful clip of Susan Cavera, the mother of a son with same-sex attraction. And Janet, you also interviewed her husband as well.
That's right.
Correct?
They were both speakers at the conference that we attended last year, the Courage conference, also sponsored by the Archdiocese of Detroit. And Robert Cavera also was able to sit and talk to me about how did he feel, what happened. So let's hear what he had to say.
Oh, I was crushed, devastated, panicky, all of those kinds of emotions that come with something that you just can't agree with and that you feel is terribly harmful. And I didn't respond well to him. I didn't put my arms around him. I didn't tell him that I loved him, that we would be with him in this fight and this struggle. We would work on it together. I didn't do any of that. And I wished I had. I may not have changed the outcome, but I wished I had done that. He seemed convinced that this is who he was and who he wanted to be. I can recall driving to work and becoming grieving so much for decisions he was making and the direction his life was going, just in tears. I had to pull off the side of the road because I couldn't drive. And that went on for some time until it came to me, and it took a while, because I'm a little dense maybe, that all those tears, were they all for him or were they for me? Was it because I was so disappointed? That's the I again. Were the tears, and I think they were for him and for the choices he was making, but they were also in part for the choices I had made and where I had not been the kind of father I felt I needed to have been to him. So it was a difficult time. It was a very difficult time. And I think when we finally realized that we couldn't control his behavior and that we had to just work on how we related to him, that we began to make a positive step in the situation. Because we didn't talk about the issue that much more with him. We just focused on how we could respond in a more loving way with him. And so the issue just didn't get brought up after that. Not that it wasn't there, it just didn't get brought up between the two of us. We met several of his friends over a period of time. Some were very nice, some weren't. All of them ended, they broke up or stopped seeing each other, and that was always difficult because it was often a traumatic experience. And it was, he was in need back then, and we would try to figure out how we needed to respond to that. It's difficult to talk about his relationships with other men. I mean, I even find it uncomfortable talking about it right now, because it just isn't something that I want for him and hope for him. But I've learned to turn it over to God. I've learned to put him at the foot of the cross. I've learned to pray. I've learned that the unity that his mother, my wife, and I share is important. The time we spend in prayer, that we can communicate with one another. We've had too many encounters with couples whose were in disagreement over what their son or their daughter was doing, and the relationship between the parents is devastated or broken or strained, and we're so grateful that didn't happen for us, and that we were able to come together rather than to grow apart. Important, I think, for us, and a blessing from God, because could have been different, I suppose. Well, I would say to them, take a deep breath. I would say, put your arms around your son, first thing. Take him in your arms and hold him, and tell him that you love him. Tell him that you'll be with him in this difficulty that's in his life. Tell him that you don't agree with the behavior, but you love him, and you'll always love him. It'll never change for you. That too came as a late revelation. The pain that our son was in I never thought about it. I mean, he came out to us, and I responded to him, and I was in pain. I knew he had struggles, but we were suffering because of his choices. And then suddenly, it occurred to me, again, maybe the Holy Spirit, that what about the pain he's in? What about the pain he's been in for the last 20 years? As he grew up with this and tried to deal with it in ways that were difficult. Rebellion, trouble at school, the way he dressed, the way he had his hair cut, and kinds of things he was doing, and scrapes with the law, drugs. And it was all a smokescreen, all of it. All of it really was that he was struggling with same-sex attraction, and he didn't know what to do about it. And the pain that he must have been in through all of that was significant. I never, at first, for some time, never realized it.
Oh, that is such a powerful interview. And when the regret that he has about not saying to his son, I love you, I don't agree with your lifestyle, but I love you. But you can only imagine the pain and the shock when a parent learns
and
that.
both Susan and Robert had that same reaction, both their interviews. Oh, if we had just hugged him and said, we love you no matter
But
what.
as Robert said, that may not have obviously changed the outcome,
right.
but at least
But
maybe
it would have been,
But
they
they're-
felt a
they
better
would have
response.
been
He
able
would
to
have
deal with it
felt
a little bit
loved
better. Yeah.
unconditionally. And parents have to know the environment that young people are growing up in is so
Totally
intense. I went
toxic.
to university 20 years ago, and the indoctrination was so heavy for you to experiment. And so young women are being pressured to experiment, to consider that you might not be heterosexual, you might be bisexual, you might be, look at all these different, now today it's out of control.
Right.
Facebook has like how many different things you could be.
53 gender identities
Yeah,
that you
so
can
the
claim.
pressure, and then we're fallen human nature. So people are vulnerable to these things. So parents have to understand the environment that their young people are growing up in, but also that in God's permissive will, He allows these things, and there's something good that can come out of it. That's something that we could have that trust that God is in control here.
Well, another good resource that we picked up at the conference is from the Catholic Medical Association, this booklet called Homosexuality and Hope. And let me just read another question that's answered in this booklet too, because again, our viewers might be everything's racing through their minds.
Yes.
So this next question is, what are the warning signs that a child is at risk for developing same-sex attraction? And the answer is, if a child exhibits symptoms of gender identity disorder, which includes identification with the opposite sex, limited ability to bond with same-sex peers, lack of rough and tumble play in boys, cross-dressing, discomfort with their own sex, and social anxiety, he or she is at high risk. If gender identity disorder in childhood is left untreated, approximately 75% of those children will go on to develop a same-sex attraction. So, they're telling them right there that those are kind of like the warning signs. And all this, the gender identity, as you know, in the secular world,
Right.
some of the department stores now are gender neutralizing the toy departments. We can't have the boys' toys and the dolls. We can't have the princess toys and the G.I. Joes. No, now it's going to be gender neutral. They're trying to play into normalizing everything, as opposed to what the doctors are saying here is not good.
Right, right. And two, I think it's important to remember for parents that sometimes parents automatically think, well, it's my child, so I love them, so therefore I must, affirm everything that they do. That's not the case, as you heard, Robert and
Right.
Susan say, we love our son, we don't agree with his lifestyle, but we still love him.
Right.
And I had a conversation with a woman at my dentist office, actually, whose son told her that he was homosexual, and she was Catholic. And she's automatically said, well, it's, what do I do? It's my son. And I said, well, I said, we had a nice conversation about it. And I said, well, how does this, play out with your Catholic faith? And she kind of at first didn't want to hear about it. But I have enough relationship with her where I can talk to her, and I gave her information about Courage. I gave her information of the local chaplain of Courage in Detroit. So we'll see how it goes. But I think it's important to let people know that there is help available.
That's right.
That parents don't have to go through this alone. If you remember, Janet, when we were pulling up to the conference one morning, there was a group outside of this conference that was protesting.
Yes.
They were parents of children with same-sex attraction, but they disagreed with the church teaching.
Right.
And Al Cresta passed by them, who, of course, is afternoons at Ave Maria Radio in EWTN, and he stopped and invited them in. And they said, oh, no, we're not going to come in. We already know what they talk about. And so they weren't even open to see what the conference was saying. And Al said, well, you might want to come in because there's parents of children with same-sex attraction like you, but they're going to share their story. Why don't you want to hear what they have to say? Right. So sometimes there's this defensive wall that goes up.
That's right.
Within us, we say, no, I don't want to, I don't want to hurt my son or daughter. I don't want to challenge them. But the church is for all of our benefit. I mean, we have to take a serious look at what the church teaches.
Well, and if you notice too, both Robert and Susan and anyone we've spoken to, they all talk about the importance of the sacraments and prayer. What I'd like to point out to our
Praying
viewers
together.
is praying
Praying
together.
together as a couple.
There's a beautiful prayer to St. Raphael, the Archangel, and it's the angel of healing.
But we're really short on time, so we don't have time to read the prayer.
We will have it on our website. It's a beautiful prayer, and you could be praying that. So you
also wanted to remind people I've invited to Courageous Love, which is a DVD series, and we'll have that. We don't have this on our homework board right now, but we will have it on our website at Catholic View for
It's from
Women.
EWTN.
EWTN, yeah.
That's right. Well, the homework is, of course, first visit the Courage website, which is couragerc.org. The second one, of course, is to pray, like I just said, and the prayer for the healing to St. Raphael. And number 3 is look at the book Living the Truth in Love by Janet Smith and Father Paul Check, available at Ignatius Press. This has a lot of the essays from the speakers at that
That actually
conference.
is that was compiled. The essays were given to Ignatius Press ahead of the conference, and it was made available. And this is amazing because it's all the talks that were given at the conference. We're almost out of time, so
Okay,
real
and
quickly.
then 5, of course, read the booklet that I just gave that one question from, which is from the Catholic Medical Association, Homosexuality and Hope, Questions and Answers. Great resources.
Great resources, and I want to thank again the Caveras for sharing their very powerful testimony. And thank you for tuning in to this very important episode of The Catholic View for Women. All the resources are on our website at thecatholicviewforwomen.com. We'll see you next time.